Hey, good morning, everyone. Hello, welcome to this talk. My name is Lýdia Machová. I'm from Slovakia, and I used to be one of the main organizers of this very polyglot gathering. And that's why I'm really excited to be back here. I'm very honored to be here as a speaker again, and I'm really excited to talk about language learning again, one of my favorite topics to talk about. If we haven't met, you may have seen maybe my TED Talk, which is gaining a lot of views on the TED.com website, or you may have seen some of my talks at the Polyglot Gathering or Polyglot Conference. And if not, this will be our first one, and I will be very happy to talk about speaking this time. The main topic of my talk is, do you want to learn a language for ages, or do you want to speak it now? And this is because I meet so many people who tell me that they've been learning a language for a long time. They've spent years trying to learn French or German or Russian, and they still cannot quite get there. They are still not fluent. They don't feel comfortable using that language, and they don't know why it is, because they have spent so much time learning that language. And I really feel for these people, and I would like to give my answer to these questions. So this presentation might not be the best for polyglots who are already very experienced with many languages, but rather this talk will be meant for those of you who are struggling to learn one or two languages, and especially if you feel that this speaking element is just not there. You don't feel fluent and confident when using this language. So first of all, let us define, what does it mean to know a language? Well, when do you say that this is one of the languages that I can use, right? When does it happen? I think that in order to really know a language, to master a language, to be able to use it, you need to master 7 different skills. The first one is listening, and the second is reading. You need to be able to understand the language. These two are 2 input activities, and you need to be able to understand when you listen to something, when you hear the language, and when you see it written, right? It's natural, because otherwise you would not be able to understand what someone is saying or writing. The second the 2 second pillars are vocabulary and grammar. Now, once you've got the input of the language, so you saw how the language works from the outside and it got into your head, you need to process it in your head. You need to see patterns. That's where grammar comes in. And vocabulary, those are the main building blocks of any language, the words which we need in order to use the language, right? So these are the first 4. And then we have the output activities, which are writing, speaking, and the little brother of speaking, which is pronunciation. Now, this is the output in a language, which means that what we have heard and seen in the language through listening and reading, what we have processed in our head through vocabulary and grammar, we now need to give out to the world in order to communicate with other people. And whether we do it in writing or in speaking, those are the 2 main ones. And as I said, pronunciation is there because we also need to make sure that we are understood when we speak in a foreign language because of our accent. So these are the 7 main activities that we need to cover in order to learn a language. Now, which one of them do you think is the most important? If you only had to pick one, which one would you choose? Make a guess for yourselves. Now, you've heard the name of my talk, so you will probably know which one I think is the most important, but some of you may have said vocabulary. You will say, well, without words, there is no language, so obviously it's vocabulary. I still dare to claim that speaking is the most important one of all. And I have 3 particular proofs, which I would like to show you in order to persuade you if you don't think that speaking is really the most important one. Proof number 1, how do you ask someone if they can communicate in a language, if they have learned a language? In English, you say, do you speak English? In German, you would say, sprichst du Deutsch? In Slovak, you would say, hovoríš po slovensky? In French, you would say, parlez-vous français? Hablas español? Говорите по-русски? All of these sentences in different languages have one word in common. Which one is it? It's not very difficult. Speaking, right? Do you speak English? No one has ever asked anyone a question. Can you read in French? Or do you know the Spanish vocabulary? People always ask about speaking because that is really what matters, right? You may be the best reader in French and understand everything by reading French, but if you cannot speak the language, then you will not claim that you actually speak it, that you can use it, right? Proof number 2. When you send a CV somewhere and in the language section, what do you write? You will say that your Spanish is fluent and your German is fluent, But what does it mean to be fluent? Will you say this if you cannot speak the language at all? If you just understand it really well when you watch some movies? Probably not. Being fluent, again, is about speaking the language. If someone is really good at understanding the language but not good at speaking, then they will probably not claim to have this as one of their languages in the CV, right? So again, we come to the argument that speaking seems to be the most important skill. And my third proof is this fascinating man, Nigel Richards. I don't know if you heard about him. He won the French Scrabble Championship. So Scrabble is the game where you have different letters and you make words out of them. And Nigel was the best. He mastered, he beat all the masters at the French Scrabble because this is the important thing, he doesn't even speak French. He just memorized the French Scrabble dictionary. Isn't that fascinating? This guy's from New Zealand. He has never learned any French, but in order to win the French championship, he just memorized all these words from the French dictionary. How amazing is that, right? What I find really amazing about this story, though, is that Nigel Richards would never claim to speak French. He wouldn't say, oh, French is one of my languages, one of the languages I can communicate in. No, because he cannot speak the language. The funny thing here is that when he won the championship, the audience applauded excitedly, and his reaction was using a translator to thank the audience. Imagine that you win the French Scrabble championship and you cannot even say merci beaucoup or something like that. You know, it's just amazing. And I think this really just proves the point that if you don't have the speaking element in your language, then the others don't really count that much. I'm not saying they are not important, okay? Don't get me wrong. I think all of these 7 activities are really important. And if you want to master a language to a fluent level, you will need to have mastered all of them on a certain level. You will need to have spent time with listening and reading and vocabulary and grammar. But if you put your focus on all the other ones and not speaking, then you will not be able to say that you really speak the language, that you know it, that you can use it. So I believe speaking is the most important language skill. And by the way, in my presentation today, when you see this little bulb in the circle, that's when I'm making a point. So if you guys are taking any notes, I suggest these slides would be the ones to maybe take a note from. Now the question is, okay, let's agree that speaking is important, okay? But how can we learn to speak a foreign language well? So yes, Lydia, you're right, this is important now. How do I get there? Well, first of all, let's look at how do we actually acquire new skills in life in general. Let's forget about language learning for a minute, okay? Let's think about playing the piano. How do you learn to play the piano? Well, you buy the piano and you either take lessons with a teacher or you learn by yourself. You learn the scores, you start with simple melodies, and then you practice and get better at it, right? How do you learn to walk? How did we all learn to walk, or how do your children learn it? Well, they make the first steps. They let go of the furniture for one day and for a second, and then make one step. And then they probably fall, and then they get up and take another step, and this is how we learn to walk, right? How do you learn to drive a car? You sit at the wheel and you practice driving. How do you build your muscles? You go to the gym and practice regularly. I'm not saying anything new here, right? I think this is the most natural thing, the most natural way how we acquire new skills in life. If you want to learn that skill, you practice that skill. Imagine someone would want to learn to drive the car without sitting in the car. They would say, oh, I'm going to watch all the YouTube videos about driving the car. Or imagine someone would want to learn to play the piano without actually having a piano at home. You would say they're crazy, right? It's impossible. You need to practice that skill if you want to learn that skill. It's quite obvious, isn't it? Well, let's get back to language learning, because this is really something that applies to everything, not just language learning, anything. The only way you can learn a new skill is by practicing that very skill. So our language also improves only in the area which you practice. I'm going to give you a few examples because it's really the same thing, just like driving a car or playing the piano. If you watch a series, let's pick a random one, Friends, which is, by the way, my favorite one, you will practice your listening comprehension, right? The more you listen, the more you watch, the better you get at understanding the language. It will not help you with the other skills, or not mainly, but it's really about practicing your listening. If you get a book of grammar, let's say English Grammar in Use, which by the way I think is also the best book of English grammar there is, what do you practice? You do a lot of exercises and you practice your grammar, right? And when you have a conversation with a friend, with a teacher, with a tutor, then that's when you practice speaking. The most important thing to notice here is that when I watch Friends, I'm not working on my grammar. When I'm doing the exercises, English Grammar in Use, I am not working on my speaking. I'm not improving that skill. The only way for me to improve speaking is to actually sit down and have a conversation, to put the words in my head and put them out there and see if someone understands me and if we can have a conversation. It's quite understandable, right? It's quite natural. Now, this is where we get into trouble because many people say, "Ooh, I want to learn to speak Spanish, so I'm going to learn with Duolingo every day." Duolingo is just one of the apps. I'm using the most famous one because it's just so popular. And don't get me wrong, I don't dislike Duolingo. I loved using it for 4 or 5 of my languages because it's fun, it's enjoyable. You match words together, you put them together with pictures, you translate sentences. It's fun, right? But what many people get wrong is that in this way, by playing around with the words and matching them with pictures and little translations, they think they are improving their speaking. And they think they are learning to speak Spanish using apps such as Duolingo. I believe this is just impossible because this is not the skill that you are practicing with this app. The app, again, is great for many things, and many people think that they will improve speaking. That's not the case, but they will improve their vocabulary, right? And slightly also their grammar, because these are the two main things which you get in there. You may get a little bit of listening, a little bit of reading, obviously, but that usually comes with more material if you have a book or if you listen to a TV series or podcast or something like that. So with apps like Duolingo, you mainly and mostly together, mainly practice vocabulary and grammar, but you do not practice your speaking. And that's why so many people come to me and they are surprised. They say, "Lydia, but I've been learning for half a year. I've been putting so much time into it. How come I cannot use the language? How come I cannot speak it?" Well, that's because the activity you chose was not meant to get you to the goal you have. If your goal is to speak the language, then you need to also find ways how to practice speaking. And that's my main takeaway number 2. It works with any activity in the world, and it also works with language learning. If you want to learn to speak a foreign language, you have to find a way to actually practice speaking. You can't go around it. Although this is what most people do, right? I can tell you that nobody I know has ever learned to speak a foreign language without speaking it a lot. And I'm speaking from my own experience. I have the experience of learning 9 different languages. I have managed to get 7 of them to a fluent level, which I'm able to keep long term. And this has never happened without a lot of hours spent speaking. I had so many conversation lessons, language exchanges, paid tutors, friends that I would talk to, so many hours spent with each of these languages. And that's what brings me to the ability to use the languages in speaking, because that's what I want. I'm not just speaking for myself. I also dare to speak in the names of some of my friends, polyglot friends, some of whom you may know. Richard Simcott, Luca Lampariello, Benny Lewis, Judith Mayer, or Steve Kaufman, amazing polyglots who have ample experience with so many languages. And if they speak the language, you can be absolutely sure that they spend a lot of time actually practicing speaking. It doesn't come from reading a book. It doesn't come from working or playing around with an app. By the way, this picture is from Polyglot Gathering 2018. If you guys were here, then you may have seen us on stage together. So that brings us to the question, why are we so afraid of speaking? Why do we try to avoid it? Because I really feel this is the situation with most people. When you are supposed to speak in that language that you are not quite sure of yet, you don't have that confident level yet, you feel like this little kitten, totally frozen, afraid to make one step, because you need to put yourself out there. It's way outside of your comfort zone. You don't have enough words. You don't have enough vocabulary and grammar. You don't know if you sound correct, right? So why are we afraid? I would like to philosophize a bit about this. Why are we so afraid, and why do we avoid it? Again, I see 3 reasons for this. Reason number one is that we naturally avoid things which are difficult. This is just something that is typical of the human kind. And if we can read a book instead, or just watch some series and avoid the difficult stuff, we'll do it. And we will be happy thinking, oh, we are working on the language. This is all I need. This is something I enjoy. And so that's what we like to do a lot of. Reason number two is we have unrealistic expectations of ourselves. This is, again, something I see quite a lot with people. We have a picture in our mind how we will sound when we have that first conversation with a native speaker, for example, right? And if it was a painting, we would imagine something like this. Beautiful picture with a lot of details, just communicates clearly what it is, and it's just beautiful. It's amazing. But what comes out of our mouth, how we actually communicate in that first lesson when we are still learning, is rather something like this. Some of you may have recognized these two pictures, obviously from the Mr. Bean episode. And I love this example because it just shows that many people really think that they want to paint a beautiful picture. They want to speak eloquently and fluently and with a perfect accent and using all the right words. But instead, somehow it is just a head of, a woman, a person, let's say. It's a human head in there. And that is kind of how our language sounds at the beginning. So we need to set our expectations lower. You cannot expect to be that perfect fluent speaker right away. It will take some time, but you will get there ultimately. It's okay if at first your painting is like the one on the right. Reason number three why we are afraid of speaking and we procrastinate with it is that we see mistakes as something negative. And I believe this goes back to our education system and all those years in school that many of us have spent trying to learn French or German or Russian or whatever language it was, spending years and years going to those lessons, but never seeing a lot of progress. That's because mistakes were considered bad. So a typical lesson, a teacher asks a question and you don't want to raise your hand because you know you will make a mistake. If you do it and you make a mistake, you are punished. You get a bad grade, or the teacher is not happy with what you said. And I had this a lot in my school days with learning English and German. It would be considered that I didn't study enough. If I made those mistakes like, hey, Lydia, you didn't do your homework. And I believe this is a big thing that we are carrying on with ourselves all our lives. And that's why we prefer not to say anything, because we might say some mistakes. We might make some mistakes, and we don't want to do that. Unfortunately, what happens then is that we got caught up in what I call the vicious circle of non-speaking. What does it mean? If you have this approach of this little kitten, frozen kitten, that is afraid to say anything, you don't say anything, right? You go like, oh, the teacher asked the question, let the others answer because I don't know if I can do it correctly. I will probably use the wrong tense or not the right word, so let the others speak. But given that you don't speak, you will not improve. You cannot. I mean, we agreed that the only way to improve your speaking ability is to speak a lot. And if you are not speaking, you are not improving. Now we get back to next lesson, next week. The teacher asks another question. You are not going to reply because you haven't improved at all. You are still at this stage. You are stuck there. You are afraid. So you don't speak. And when you don't speak, you don't improve. And that's why you don't speak again next time. And this is just a vicious circle that will go on forever. And you can really spend ages going to those lessons. But if you don't take action, if you don't really start speaking, then nothing will change. The way out of this vicious circle of non-speaking is actually quite simple. What you need to do is to change your approach. It's like, I'm going to learn this. Mistakes are okay. I'm going to work on it. I will be proactive. You raise your hand when the teacher asks a question and you go out there and you speak. And when you speak, that's how you get better and better and better. And you speak more and you get better. And this spiral gets us to improve our speaking skills. That's actually as simple as that. All you need to do is to go out there and speak, even though you don't feel ready for speaking. I gave the example of having a language lesson, but this applies to your own language learning. If you are an independent language learner, you can be proactive and take extra lessons, conversation lessons with tutors, with teachers. You can ask a friend who is learning the language with you to let's have a conversation. You don't need a teacher to be strictly in that lesson. You need to practice a lot. Practice speaking as much as possible. You can even talk to yourself. The self-talk method is quite popular with many polyglots. The more you practice speaking, the better you get. The better you get, the more excited you are about speaking more. And this is what will get you to the fluency level. Does that make sense? I hope it does. I got the feedback from many people that the vicious circle of non-speaking makes it actually quite clear why so many people have spent years trying to learn a language and never really got to use it for what they want, for speaking. So really, let's think of mistakes as a natural part of learning. I mean, just think about it. With languages, we are so strict to ourselves. We are such strict judges for ourselves. But let's compare it with this little child, the baby, taking the first steps. Can you imagine that parents are watching their child holding on to the furniture, and then the child lets go and takes one step? And the parents are excited. It's like, oh my God, he's walking. Can you imagine that the child then falls? And the parents go like, oh man, such an untalented child. I really thought we had a more talented kid who would like walk properly. What is this? No one ever does this, right? That's absolutely absurd. All parents in the world will be super excited because the child is trying and you want to see him take another step and then fall again. That's okay. That's part of the learning process. He's making mistakes because he's learning, because he's taking those steps. And that's what we get excited about. So why do we not get excited about that with language learning as well? Why don't we see our own first steps in the language as, you know what, I made 5 mistakes in this little short sentence, but I tried. I gave it my best, and I'm going to try more and then make fewer and fewer mistakes in the future. And that's how I will learn to walk, in our metaphor, learn to speak the language. I think the real solution to this stressed approach is changing your mindset. If you in your mind will stay afraid of speaking, you are like this kitten who doesn't want to take the first step because what if I make a mistake? What if it doesn't work out? Mistakes are really no big deal. And as long as you understand it in your mindset, in your subconscious mind, then it will change everything. And you will turn from this fearful kitten to this courageous kitten who is taking the first step, doesn't know where it will land. Maybe there is a bee waiting down there, doesn't matter. I want to go out in the world and I want to use the language I want to speak. That's why I will try it no matter what. The mistakes are okay. Mistakes are part of the learning process. Now, this is easy to say. It's more difficult to change it in your mindset, and I understand that. I don't expect that by watching this short talk, you will suddenly change everything and you will start speaking tomorrow. But it really is a lot about this mindset. And if this thought just bears with you for some time and you think about it next time you have those conversation lessons, I think step by step, it can definitely help you and you can get rid of that stress and anxiety and start speaking, because that's what will get you to fluency. So that was my takeaway number, I think 3 or 4. If you are afraid of making mistakes, which is natural, you have to overcome that fear. You have to find a way and start practicing this skill of speaking. There is really no other way, because otherwise you will get stuck in the vicious circle of non-speaking. I don't want to speak, so I'm not improving. I will not want to speak tomorrow, I will not improve. And that just goes on forever. Now, I hear some of you saying, but Lydia, I actually do practice speaking in my language lessons. It's not that bad. Like we practice speaking a lot, but still, after years of going to the language course or taking those language lessons, I still don't feel confidence in my speaking. Why is that? Well, let's do a little math here, shall we? I thought of a typical example of going to a typical group language course, whether it's in a language school or at school, at a university, or if your company offers something like that. And let's say that you have that lesson twice a week with a teacher, okay? Let's say that each of those 2 days takes 1.5 hours, 90 minutes. So you have on Monday and Wednesday, you have that lesson. This seems to be the typical setup, at least here in Central Europe, but Anyway, if your situation is different, you can easily do the math for yourself. Let's say that there are 6 students in the class, which I think is quite typical of group classrooms, which are the most frequent ones. So how much time do you speaking in that lesson? Let's say it's 1/3. Although I think this is being quite generous, because I used to teach English for 10 years, so I know how many different things there are that the teacher needs to cover with the students. There's reading the text, going through the vocabulary, explaining the grammar, doing the exercises, writing skills, and all these other sections that they need to cover. Let's say if you have a really motivated teacher who understands how important it is for you to speak, then they will do all they can to give you 1/3 of the time of the lesson for speaking. Okay, so what does that mean? In a week, if you look at it, if you look at the numbers, then the time spent speaking in the lessons was 60 minutes, right? Monday, Wednesday, 30 minutes each. Now, out of those out of that speaking time, yours was only 1/6, because there are 6 students in the classroom, and let's say the teacher wants to be fair and give the advantage to everyone, and ask the question and listen and give feedback. So that only gives you 10 minutes a week of speaking. In a year, if we don't count the time when these courses are not held because it's Christmas, a summer break, a break between trimesters, that may be 3 months without any speaking at all or any language contact. And then, so the months that stay with language lessons are 9 months. That's 3/4 of a year. So when we apply this to the 10 minutes, we don't even get 10 minutes a week. We get something like 7.5 minutes. So on average, with this language setup, you spend 8 minutes speaking in a foreign language per week. Again, we are speaking about the speaking activity, the practice, the activity that we want to practice most. 8 minutes, that's all you got. And at the same time, you are going to those lessons for 90 minutes twice a week. So your feeling is like, I'm giving this language quite a lot of my time. How come I don't speak it yet? Well, it may be because you are only spending 8 minutes with the real activity you want to learn, and that's speaking. Can you imagine how much it would help you to go to the gym or play the piano for 8 minutes a week? Imagine someone takes lessons with a piano teacher, and they go to the lesson Monday morning and they practice for 8 minutes and then done, see you next week. Can you imagine this person expecting to play anything meaningful and something you can listen to within a few months? Imagine walking, that the child only tries for 8 minutes a day, or driving a car, or going to the gym. Can you imagine you go to a gym, you pay for your membership, you go there, show up every, again, Monday, do the heavy lifting for 8 minutes, and then you let go. See you next week for 8 minutes. And then you will look at your muscles after a few weeks, looking for it like, hey, where's my muscles? I've been going there regularly, right? I believe this is a big, big problem for many people, and a big aha moment possibly for many of you, because if you don't give focus to the activity you actually want to learn, which is speaking, as we agreed on, then you cannot expect to know it. You cannot expect to learn to speak fluently and confidently without those hours of practicing. So my takeaway from this is that going to language lessons is not the same as practicing speaking. The key thing here is really how much time you spend speaking, not how much time you spend going to the lessons and doing all the other activities. You can easily improve this. You can have that language course, and you can supplement it with additional conversation lessons, whether it's, again, with a teacher or a friend, or even by yourself. Now, I hear a big objection. I already hear it when you are watching this video. You are thinking, Lydia, but I don't know enough Spanish, French, German, whatever, to be able to actually speak it. This doesn't work for me. I agree with you. It's important to speak, but I'm just not there. How can I speak if I don't have enough words? I don't know the grammar. It's like, how is this possible? Well, I want to tell you about my secret method, which will help you on whatever level of language you are, okay? And I'm going to use the pictures we've already seen. So we have the painting where we want to get. This is the ideal. This would be amazing to speak like this and be able to paint a picture in this way. What we actually do is this, just like Mr. Bean. This is what I call the Mr. Bean technique. The key here is simplification. If you simplify what you are trying to say, if you use the most basic words, the most basic vocabulary, people will still understand what you are trying to say. I mean, if anyone looks at this picture below, no one will say that this is, I think it's a tree, or I think it's a house. Everybody says this is a human head, right? I see a nose, I see eyes, I see mouth, I see a head. So it's a head. A 3-year-old child would know this is a head. A 3-year-old child would probably draw a better head, but that's not the question here, okay? The important thing here is it is a head, and everybody gets it. And that's what we want to achieve at the lower level of speaking a language. We don't want perfection. We don't want to wait till we get there in order to start speaking, because this will never work. But we want to practice at the lowest level possible. I know this may be difficult to imagine for you, so I'm going to give you a practical example, okay? This is my former tutor of Swahili, Hamdi, and we had conversation lessons and we were just generally speaking about life, and I was simplifying everything I could because my Swahili level at that time was an A2 or something, so it was really difficult. Now, I wanted to explain mortgage. The word mortgage. Well, a mortgage is a loan you take from a bank if you want to buy a flat or a house, right? And I didn't know the word. I didn't have any financial vocabulary at all. So what I said to Hamdi in that lesson was this. I was fully concentrating, and I said in simple sentences something like this. I want a house, but the house is expensive. I don't have money. The bank has money. The bank buys the house for me. I will live in the house. I will pay the bank money every month. I will pay the bank more money. The bank is happy because it has more money. I am happy because I have a house. That was how I explained a mortgage, and guess what? It worked. Hamdi totally got what I said. He even clapped his hands. They're very supportive. That was sweet. And I was so proud of myself for being able to express such a complex idea like mortgage in a language which I was just a beginner at, right? And this is what it's all about. When we have this nice, beautiful picture, the level, the B2 plus level that we want to get to, that's when we explain a mortgage such as a loan that the borrower uses to purchase a form of real estate and agrees to pay back over time. The definition, right? All the fancy words. And when a beginner looks at this, they go like, I don't know almost all the words in this sentence. How can I explain mortgage? It's impossible. Well, it is. It's just that the painting will be slightly different. It's not the nicest painting in the world, but it gets the meaning across. And this is what we want to achieve when speaking a language on a lower level. Okay, so this is the Mr. Bean method, and it's really the key to start speaking on any level is to simplify as much as you can. It almost goes down to the Tarzan way of saying things like me Tarzan, you Jane. As long as you get understood, that's good, and you can work on improving that. And one final objection I hear from you guys is, but I don't want to sound like Tarzan in a foreign language. What you've just said, Lydia, is, I mean, that's okay for you, but I don't want to sound like that. I want to like express myself as an intelligent person that I am. So this doesn't work for me. Well, let's not forget that this is the process of learning, just like taking those first steps and falling, or playing the piano and starting with very simple melodies. You are going to improve it, okay? This is your way, your ticket. The Mr. Bean method is your ticket out of the vicious circle to go on the spiral and improve your speaking. In a few months, you can describe a mortgage in very different ways. You can say, I'm thinking of getting a mortgage because the interest rate is rather low these months. I mean, you can say whatever you want about the topic. You can make it more fancy, more developed, more elaborate. And that's how you will improve step by step. Okay, so let's summarize the main takeaways from my talk. I hope at least one idea has been useful for you and it will stick with you. So speaking is the most important language skill there is. I really believe this. I gave you 3 proofs to prove it. You can only learn to speak by practicing speaking. No other way. Not by reading books, not by playing around with apps such as Duolingo, not by listening to something. It requires the activity of speaking. We tend to avoid speaking, and this is a natural thing. So it's not that you are a special case, okay? I hear it all the time. Oh, Lydia, but I have such a block. No, you don't know what I'm talking about because this mental block is in my head and I cannot speak. Well, that's because, first of all, it's difficult, yeah? Let's just say it openly. Speaking language when you are not there yet, it's difficult. It's way outside of our comfort zone, so we try to avoid it. Our expectations are often too high. We don't speak because we are not there yet. We have this painting in our head, how we want to sound, and it's not there yet, so we will rather not say anything. And also we see mistakes as something negative. We think that, oh, I will rather not say anything because if I make a mistake, I will make a fool of myself. No, you are making steps in your language learning process. We also agreed that going to a language course is not the same as practicing speaking. So don't take the times like, oh, but I've spent twice 90 minutes every week for the language, for speaking. No, you are spending that for the language in general, but not for practicing speaking, okay? And we also mentioned the special method to start speaking at N level, and that's simplification, or the Mr. Bean method. I see you guys have a lot of questions. This will be my last or one before last slide, and I will be happy to answer them, okay? I really honestly, guys, believe that everyone can learn a language, any foreign language, to a fluent level. And all you need to do are four main things. These are the four main pillars of my language learning philosophy, of the whole language mentoring website that I built. And I also mentioned them in the TED Talk, which you may have seen. You need to speak a lot. You need a lot of contact with the language, with that particular activity. You need to make it fun. It needs to be enjoyable. So speak about the topics that you enjoy, not about something that your teacher selected. You need to make it effective. We mentioned one effective method, the simplification method. If you can really use this in practice, it will change everything for you. Your language learning will never be the same. You need to have a system. So don't just say, oh yeah, oh cool. I'll speak when I have time or when I feel like it. No, make it a thing in your calendar. If you don't put it in your calendar, it's a dead dream. I think it's something that Tony Robbins or someone like that said. So definitely having a system, having a plan helps a lot. And that's all from me, folks. If you would like to stay in touch, please feel free to visit our website, languagementoring.com. You can follow us on Facebook, Instagram, or YouTube. Just type in language mentoring and we will stay in touch in this way. I will be very happy to hear from you and maybe to meet you somewhere at these conferences later on next year. So I think we can go to the questions now. I see quite a lot of them here, more than 16. I'll try to get as many as I can, okay? So Margareta is asking, how do you keep your level of fluency in most of the languages? What is your daily routine? How much time do you dedicate daily to keep the fluency in those languages? I hope not to disappoint anyone who believes that this is what I do, but I don't have such a routine, okay? I'll be very honest with you guys. My way of learning languages is that I spend time, about an hour a day with a language, and I spend 2 years with one language, and I learn it. I learn it to fluency. I achieve the comfortable fluency level, and then I just use it whenever I feel like using it or I have a chance. I don't have a routine. I know there are hyper polyglots out there who go like every morning I do 15 minutes of every language, and it's so impressive. I could personally not do that. I love languages, but this would totally kill me. This for me would be too much of work or too much of I don't know, commitment. I like to get to the fluent level and then use it. I used to travel a lot before COVID, so that gave me a lot of options, a lot of opportunities to use the languages when I was traveling. Now I just get to stay in touch with some friends that are speaking that language, and that's how I stay in touch with them. I also like to read books in different languages. So in general, I would say once a year, I read a book in all of the languages that I'm fluent in, but that's not a rule. It's just something that I enjoy doing. Okay. Andras is asking, what do you recommend for learners who want to develop speaking skills but don't really feel like speaking, and that's why they don't look for opportunities to talk with someone? Interesting. So the question here is, if you don't feel like speaking, but you want to develop speaking skills. So I'm not sure if I understand the question correctly. So if you want to develop speaking skills, that means that you will probably want to use the language for speaking, right? If you don't feel like speaking, the question is, what is really the problem? Is it because you are kind of afraid of speaking, or you don't enjoy it, you don't want to make those mistakes? Or is it just you couldn't care less? You don't want to communicate with people, you don't want to talk to anyone? If that's the case, then I would suggest that you revisit your decision that you want to learn to speak the language, because why would you want to speak it if you don't want to speak to people, right? If the real reason, if you dig deep into the reasons behind it, if the real reason is that you don't feel like it because it's a lot of work, then I suggest you rewatch my talk. I think I've covered it quite well. There's just no way around it. If you need to have that skill, you need to find a way to practice it. That's all. And when you say you don't feel like it, maybe this may also be about the way you've been practicing so far. For many people, conversation lessons are boring because the teacher suggests the topic and you have to answer questions about the environment or something like that that you might not be interested in. I like speaking as something I would like to do with friends. I pick a topic that I'm interested in. With my italki tutor, Hamdi, in Swahili, I talked about stuff that I read in a magazine. I simplified it, but it was stuff that I enjoyed. And I believe that's when you start enjoying this whole process. So Andras, maybe that helps you. Okay, let's see. This question is very similar to the first one. Okay, how do you train your speaking skills? Margareta is asking. How do you train your speaking skills in all of those languages? Do you have, for all of those languages, a speaking partner? How much % of your total time for language is dedicated to speaking? So as I mentioned, I don't have that after I've learned the language to kind of keep it. But when I have that period of I'm learning this language and I'm giving it 2 years of my time for about an hour a day, let me see. I cannot tell you exactly how much % that would be. I cannot make a guess. But I introduced speaking into my learning routine about 2 months after I start learning the language from scratch. So the first 2 months are for me to gain some vocabulary, some words, some basics in the grammar, so that I kind of look around. And that's when I start speaking on the most simple level possible. And I try to have conversations at least 2-3 times a week for 1 hour. That's what I did with Swahili, which was my last language. I would have 2 or 3 conversations. I noticed that if I have them one day after another, it helps me so much better. On the 3rd day, my tutor always told me, like, wow, Lydia, you've improved a lot. What did you do? It's like, nothing. It's like I'm in this flow of practicing speaking. So I always felt when I made it more intense. Yeah, so that's what I did. And also the practice of self-talk is quite interesting. You can introduce it into your daily schedule anytime. It can be 10 minutes in the morning while preparing breakfast. You can tell yourself what you're going to do on that day, how you're going to spend the day, what you are thinking about, or what friend you met last time and what you talked about. So yeah, these are all ideas how you can introduce it into your daily routine. Okay. And I think we can do 1 or 2 more questions. So Rohan is asking, how do you actively teach yourself to not mix languages up while speaking? For example, very similar languages that you've learned to similar levels. Very good question, Rohan. And I want to say this out loud for everyone. It does happen, okay? Similar languages will get mixed up in your head, and that's okay. My experience was very visible with Russian and Polish, for example, or Spanish and French. These 2 couples of languages are quite similar. So, for example, I learned Polish first to a very, very, very high level. I even interpreted from Polish into Slovak. And then I started learning Russian a few years later. And when I went to Russia and I immersed myself in the language, I struggled to say even 1 sentence in Polish. Actually, it happened to me that I was on the Baikal Lake and I met a friend. Of all the places in the world, I met a friend I knew from Poland. And he started speaking to me in Polish and I was just stuck. I felt terrible. I couldn't answer any question. Everything just came up in Russian because I had been in this language for such a long time. And that was such an interesting experience for me. I felt like, oh my God, I lost this language. I lost Polish because of Russian. And I felt absolutely terrible about that. But I didn't need to worry really, because once I got back home and Russian was not all around me, I was able it suddenly came back. My Polish was not lost. It was just hidden behind all this active Russian. And that's why I don't worry about losing a language. If you are learning 2 languages, similar languages at the same time, I suggest that you don't learn both of them on a beginner level. I suggest that you learn 1 language, and then if you want to learn 2, choose the other one which is different from the first one. And once you have a good level in 1 language, then I would introduce the second one. That would be my general tip. to help you not mix them up, because otherwise you will be disappointed, right? Okay, guys, I think we will not have time for any more questions, but I really thank you for all the questions you've posted. I would really love to talk to you live if it were possible at a Polyglot gathering like we used to. Hopefully next year we will all be able to meet and talk some more. So thank you very much for watching this, and have a great rest of the conference. Bye bye.